Barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I pray that you're all doing well. I had a good Fajr Salah. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us to verse 90 of Surah An-Nisa. And this verse is very important because it deals with the idea of a treaty. And it comes after a very famous verse, that verse that many of us have heard, and a verse that's been misunderstood about the idea of violence, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wherever you find them, then you should fight against those people. And this is a verse you will see in the media and cable news and people talking about Islam as a religion of extremism. But we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after that verse, after the verse talking about fighting against those people who are fighting against you, and fighting against those people who are causing terror in the land, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the idea of peace and the idea of developing a treaty with people. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ إِلَىٰ قَوْمٍ بَيْنَكُمْ وَبَيْنَهُمْ مِيثَاقٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, except for those people. And this is very important, that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses istithna, illa. So many times people, when they read the Quran, they'll read verse by verse. And they won't look at the context. And we see this particularly in Surah An-Nisa. When it comes to verses on violence, when it comes to verses on marriage, that they'll read one verse or one even word, and they won't look at the entire context of the Quran and how each verse connects with the other one. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the previous verse, in verse 89, talks about those disbelievers, that if you find them, then you have to fight against them and kill them. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right after that, and this is a verse that people neglect and they overlook, except those people that you have a mithaq with, subhanAllah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here uses this word, and this is a word that's used throughout the Quran, that in our deen, in our faith, we do not only believe in a dar al-Islam and a dar al-harb. And this is important for Muslims and non-Muslims to know. First, many Muslims, they have this idea that either you are in a Muslim territory or the non-Muslims, they are enemies of you. And you have to have a relationship of war. And they live in this binary, this black and white. That I'm here in this masjid, but everyone outside this masjid is against me. And I have to fight against them. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says there is a group of people who you have a mithaq with, that you have a treaty with. And these people are not like the other non-Muslims. So this is important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divides and explains that with the disbelievers and even the non-Muslims that don't profess Islam, that they're different categories. And this is important for the non-Muslims as well. The non-Muslims, when they look at Muslims, sometimes many of them, they say, oh, the Muslims, they're always going to be against us. They're always fighting against us. They may look nice now, but they're going to come and they're going to hide their faith, and then they're going to spread their religion and wage war upon us. But and then they quote the verse right before. Say, look, in their book, in the Quran, it says, fight wherever you see them, kill them. That means us. They're trying to kill us. They may not say that, but it's in the Quran. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, that there is a group of people that you have a mithaq with. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains who these people that have a treaty with. أَوْ جَاءَكُمْ حَسَرَتْ صُدُورُهُمْ أَن يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ أَوْ يُقَاتِلُوا قَوْمَهُم. But for these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains, they've come over to you because their hearts shrink from fighting against you or against their own people. So here is a very beautiful phrase. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here, saying, حَسِرَتْ صُدُورُهُمْ, that their chests literally have shrunk. That when someone is out to fight a war against someone, they become strong. They put their chest up and they boast and they are excited about fighting the other opponent. But here, these people, you see their chest literally shrink. But they're not excited. Why do we have to fight these Muslims? Why do we have to go fight against these believers? And then they don't want to fight you, and they don't want to fight their own people. They are just neutral. They're not in a state of combat. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَسَلَّطَهُمْ عَلَيْكُمْ فَتَقَاتَلُوكُمْ. That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted, He could have made those people fight against you. SubhanAllah. That if it was in the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He could make certain people, certain groups of people fight against you or not fight against you. But this group of people, he decided that he doesn't want them to fight against you. But at the same time, they are not Muslim. فَإِنْ اعْتَزَلُوكُمْ فَلَمْ يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ. And then what they do, these people that maybe initially they were excited and they wanted to fight, but then their chests began to shrink. And they said, why do we want to fight? And then what happens, they start to move away. And they said, let's go away from the fighting. We're not interested in war. فَإِنْ اعْتَزَلُوكُمْ فَلَمْ يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ وَأَلْقَوْا إِلَيْكُمُ السَّلَمَ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threw in their hearts and threw in the situation the idea of sin, of peace. فَمَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ عَلَيْهِمْ سَبِيلًا. For these group of people, then you should not go ahead and fight with them. That these group of people is a people that are offering you peace, and then God gives you no way against them. So brothers and sisters in Islam, this verse is very important because we see that many times in the Tafsir or reading the Quran, people take verses out of context, whether it's words or phrases, or they don't read verses together. And we see that this is one of the beautiful elements of our Tafsir program, of reading the Quran and our Khatam, that you read it from the front to the end, because you see the interconnection of each verse. And you see in the previous verse, there is a command to fight. That if there are people that do not have a covenant, there are people who are fighting against you, there are a group of people who are causing terror in the land, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, yes, you're allowed to fight them. Yes, you're allowed to make sure that they're not creating disturbances. But then there's this istithna, illa. And these people are the people that you have a treaty with. A people that do not want to fight you. They have no desire to destroy the Muslim community. They let you pray, they let you fast, they let you work, let you buy a home and have cars and live a decent and noble life. These people, there's no reason to fight against them. And rather, it's important that you start promoting sin, a peace with them, and that there's no reason to fight them. So brothers and sisters in Islam, to conclude, we see this important idea of mithaq. When you read the Quran, this is a word that's used repeatedly. The idea of mithaq, that you have a covenant with different people. And this mithaq is also used in the idea of marriage, that between a husband and a wife there is a mithaq, a covenant, ghalid, an important one. And in this mithaq we see that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his life, in his legacy, he always wrote things down. And there's a marriage, you write down, what is the agreement? What is the mahr? Who are the witnesses? What are the gifts being exchanged? Where will these people live? You also see this in Hudaybiyah. You see in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he had a conflict with the Quraysh, but he entered into a treaties with them. And then there was agreement that their people will go back and forth. There'll be 10 years of safety. But if that mithaq is violated, then there can be separation, whether that it's in marriage or whether it's between two different parties. And we see that in Islam, there is not this concept simply of Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. And when I was preparing for this, I was reading some of the even medieval scholars, the scholars in the 13th, 14th century in Qurtuba, Imam Qurtubi. He lived in Spain. And in Spain, there was this conflict that when he was there, many of the Christian kingdoms were coming and taking over the land. And he made this point that some of the Muslims, they believe in this Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Harb, that they're non-Muslims, we have to fight them. But he says, no, this verse is the example that there's not this two concept. There is a Dar al-Mithaq. There are groups of people, kingdoms, states, organizations that you have a mithaq with, that you have an understanding that we're not going to fight against you, you're not going to fight against us, where you're going to allow us to implement and practice our deen, and at the same time, we are going to contribute to the peaceful society that we live in. And this is important for us, lastly, as Muslim minorities, living here in the United States, that we always have to think about creating partnerships. And alhamdulillah, I see this with Adams, mashallah, creating different partnerships with different organizations, whether that be other masajid, whether other places of worship, whether non-profits. We always have to think, what is the mutual benefit? How can we spread peace within the society? It's not that every organization that's not Adams we fight against, or we fight, if you don't go to my masjid, then you are not on the straight path. No, that's not the case. There are many masajid in this area that do good work. We should work with them as well. Create an MOU, create a memorandum of understanding, a statement of work. There are many nonprofits here in this community. They're helping refugees, helping women, while helping people reconcile their marriages. We should invest in those organizations. Just because they're not part of our umbrella or our Adam's community doesn't mean we should not support them. And then we see in this verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes that of peace. That if someone comes to you and they're not interested in fighting you and they allow you and give you your freedom, that we should embrace this idea of peace. And this is such an essential element of Islam, that when we greet each other, we say, Assalamu alaikum. SubhanAllah, that's a beautiful thing. And as I mentioned before, this is something I tell even my children, that sometimes they'll say hey and hi, and they'll come home and say what's up, and I say, please say Assalamu alaikum. That's the greeting of Islam. The greeting of Islam is the greeting of peace. That when you see someone, you say, I'm wishing peace upon you. And when you talk about Jannah, what is Jannah? Darus Salam. Jannah is the abode of peace. That there's no war and conflict and people scorning each other and mockery. That Islam is a religion that's always calling for peace. Peace in the heart, peace in the soul, peace within the society. And if there's a group of people that they also share this value of peace, that they want a peaceful society, and they give you and empower you to embrace and practice your religion, then we go to that and we agree. And we say, yes, we want peace within our society. And yes, we want peace within our homes and our families. And yes, we want to create partnerships that will benefit everyone in our community. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ